This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome into another episode of the Bartholomew Town Podcast. It's Bill Bartholomew here with you, as today I welcome in the director of Brown University's Tubman Center, Dr. Wendy Schiller. And this is a jam-packed episode. We talk about the Rhode Island governor's race, we talk about the CD2 race, the Pennsylvania Senate race, early voting and its impact on the overall picture here in Rhode Island and nationally, the role that not having a competitive Providence mayoral race will play in this election cycle here in Rhode Island, some of the down ballot races that are taking place like lieutenant governor and treasurer. So a lot in here today. And look, we are a week and a half away from election day. Can you believe it? It's been a crazy year. There's no question about it. I mean, at least in terms of from my perspective, I think some people were kind of looking at this election cycle and evaluating it as a little less exciting, maybe boring. Over the summer, there was some of that chatter. I know we even talked about it here on the podcast a few times, but things are definitely anything but boring right now. This is pure politics playing out, and there's some very, very competitive races here in Rhode Island, and Rhode Island is on the national stage when it comes to the congressional race. There's no question about it. So a lot to watch for. Now, some of you have been wondering where you can find the debates that I've been moderating for WPRO. What you do is you go to 997wpro.com. When you get there, just click on the Election Central tab. You'll find, if you're listening to this podcast on release day, you'll find the Lieutenant Governor's debate between Sabina Matos and Aaron Gukayan, and you'll find the Treasurer's debate between James Diosa and James Lathrop. Tomorrow, Friday, October, the 26th? Let me get my calendar out before I start giving out dates here. Yeah, it's not the 26th, actually. It's the 28th. October 28th at 4 o'clock, we'll have a live 1-hour uninterrupted debate in CD2 between Democrat Seth Magaziner and Republican Alan Fung. That'll be at 4 o'clock uninterrupted. I'll be moderating it during the Dan York Show. And then on Monday, October 31st, Halloween, also at 4 o'clock, on WPRO, a live, uninterrupted 1-hour debate between Governor Dan McKee and Republican challenger Ashley Kalus. Again, that's on Monday. And then once those debates are wrapped up, we post them on the WPRO website. So you won't find them here on Bartholomew Town. We're putting those over on the WPRO site. Again, 997wpro.com. Just click that Election Central tab, and you'll find those there. A lot ahead here in the home stretch. You may have noticed I've been putting as many episodes up as possible. I'll have a few more for you in the next couple of days. And then next week, we're going to really focus on analysis. We're not going to be looking too much. We're not going to have any candidates on. I'm kind of doing a blackout period, so to speak. We'll keep looking at some of the bond questions. I'll have URI President Mark Parlange on to talk about question 1 on Monday of next week, which is the blue economy bond. They're trying to bond money for the URI School of Oceanography, and the Bay Campus specifically, actually, is what it is. So that'll be ahead, plus, again, a lot more analysis. But for today, Dr. Wendy Schiller, a jam-packed look at so much that's going on in politics right now. As always, thanks for your support. Thanks for listening. Send me an email anytime, bill@ripodcast.com. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram @Bill Bartholomew. And make sure you hit the follow and whatnot button wherever you're listening, on Spotify, Apple, so you can get the podcast directly on your device as soon as a new episode is released. All right, so we were just talking before we started here about how it's happening. Here we are. It's like the culmination of a long year plus of Rhode Island and national election talk in what is definitely a very important election cycle. There's really no question about it. Let's start in Rhode Island right now from your perspective. Also offline, we were talking about early voting and the impact that that's going to have on the results. We saw that impact the gubernatorial, the Democratic primary gubernatorial race, where Helena Bonanno Folks actually got more in-person votes on election day than Governor McKee. But when you factor in early voting, mail-in ballots, and so forth, the governor was able to pull that race off. How much do you think overall early voting and mail ballots, so on and so forth, is going to reflect here in Rhode Island and I guess even on the national stage?
Well, I think what's interesting about early voting is that the whole principle of early voting was that you would enable people who might not be able to vote on election day to vote early and to make sure that they could vote. And these include people over the age of 65, people perhaps living in assisted living or nursing homes, people who work jobs where they can't, vote during the day as easily during the week. And, generally speaking, people who are in low wage or lower income jobs. That was sort of the big push for early voting. What we've seen in the last couple of years, though, on early voting is that it's not that population that's really taking advantage of early voting. It's people who could vote on election day. It's people who are better educated, people who are younger. This is in-person early voting. And mail by voting is also coming into fruition, that it's people who are going to vote. They know who they're going to vote for, and they like the convenience of voting early, not waiting online or doing it by mail. So we've seen that the population that was really intended to benefit from early voting is not actually the population that's engaged in early voting. So campaigns were gearing up, to get one sort of message out for people who vote early, presuming it was a particular type of voter. But I think the McKee campaign really showed in Rhode Island that it's not that voter that's really the person who should be targeted for early voting.
Right. Very interesting stuff there. And that we'll see the actual tally, and you can kind of take a look at that already here in terms of and I think Dan McGowan had a tally pretty recently of how many early votes have already taken place here. That number, though, is sure to climb immensely as we're now a week plus, well, actually, a week and a half, we'll call it, away from Election Day. I bet my gut tells me, and I think common sense would say, the next week is when we're going to see an inundation of those early votes.
My expectation is that may be true, although now, of course, they're advertising that, obviously you're going to have debates and other media organizations are going to have debates the weekend before the election or the week before the election. So there may be people who thought about voting in person early, physically going down to their local board of elections or city hall and voting. They may hold off and vote on election day, but it's the mail ballots. I think anybody who was voting by mail has probably sent it in already. Or is sending it in this week. I don't think people who got them, because I think there may be, we don't know for sure in terms of social science yet, but there could be a correlation between how certain you are about your choices and whether you use a vote by mail. At least on the Democratic side. I don't know about the Republican voters. The Republican voters, at least in 2020, we saw a tentative vote. In some cases, like Nevada, Washington State, California, Colorado, it was all vote by mail. They didn't have much choice. But in other states, we saw that Republicans tended to vote on election day, and Democratic-leaning voters voted by mail.
There's really two big ticket races here in Rhode Island. Let's start with the governor's race. Ashley Kalus had an event on Tuesday night here. In Pawtucket, where she rolled out Democrats for Kalus. Now, she really only got a couple of, I wouldn't even say household names for the average voters from the Democratic side to move in, but she knows very well that the independent voter and the conservative Democrat is really her target audience right now, getting them motivated away from Governor McKee and into her camp. We saw yesterday that the First Lady was here. Dr. Jill Biden was in town, stumping both for McKee and for congressional candidate Seth Magaziner. So now we're down to the wire. The negative ads are out there. That back and forth, that ping pong game has been playing out for some time. How much do these recent moves, the notion that Ashley Kalus is the more quote unquote centrist, going to reach across the aisle type of candidate, and the notion that Governor McKee has this national backing from the White House, how much do those two things motivate voters heading into the home stretch?
I think it depends on what you see your relationship to the state government of Rhode Island is. I mean, if you are a business person, a contractor, a state employee, or your family members are state employees, McKee's been very good to those constituencies. He's got good, strong ties to unions. He's been as progressive as any governor would be, certainly signing legislation to raise the purchasing age to 21 for guns and reprotecting reproductive choice rights by protecting reproductive choice providers. So when you think about that, it's hard to think there's a better Democrat out there if you're a Democrat, or that there's somebody who'd be better for unions. I think what McKee has not done enough of is to sort of paint Kalus as a typical Republican who'll be anti-union. And that's something that Magaziner also hasn't, I don't think, done enough against Alan Fung. And so Alan Fung can think about the teachers unions, the police unions in CD2, think of what did I do as mayor? Do they like me or not like me? But in general, national Republican policies on unions are bad for unions. So this is where I think McKee has an opening against Kalus, and Kalus has a weakness. So you can reach across the aisle and you could do things, but where is she on this? Will she be as good to state employees? So if you're a state employee and you may not be super happy with McKee, you have to think, what would she be like as governor, given that she'll have a Democratic state legislature that's powerful, but still there are things governors can do, as we saw with McKee, approving legislative bonuses for the, not legislative bonuses, state employee bonuses that were approved by the legislature. But still, that's the kind of thing that I think these Democratic candidates have to think about, because Kalus has been well prepared for debates, done well in debates, is being aggressive on advertising, is spending money. People like to see somebody who shows that they care, that they want to be governor. McKee is doing a lot of campaigning, but I didn't think the last debate, one of the last debates, went as well for McKee as it should have. And I think he's going to have to reset and repivot against in the upcoming debates.
One thing that's interesting is that we haven't seen Helena Bonanno Folks or Secretary Nelly Gorbea or even Matt Brown or Dr. Munoz out stumping for Dan McKee. It feels like the Democratic Party machine outside of the union, so to speak, isn't really out there and saying, hey, wait a minute, we need to, whatever the message is, save democracy, whatever it may be. Is that something that you find unusual, or was the tenor of the Democratic primary so aggressive that even though Helena Folks and Nelly Gorbea endorsed Governor McKee, they're just not into the idea of going out there and stumping for him?
Well, I think the Democrats have been bad about reunification after primaries nationally and in the state. Although Nelly Gorbea, to her credit, after she lost the primary, said she would fully support McKee and was supportive of the Democratic ticket. And so I think in that case, she's been out there. I'm not sure about Helena Folks. I mean, she was sort of an outsider to begin with.
Sure.
You wonder about that. You wonder if they lose this governor's race, the Democrats lose this seat and Kalus wins, will it be because the rest of the party didn't come home to McKee in terms of voting? So I think there are things they could be emphasizing, like I said, union rights, also abortion. If you have a governor who, says it's sort of unclear, like exactly where her position is. She said that she supports right to choose, as does Alan Fung. I don't think you can get elected really in Rhode Island without saying that. But what does that mean? Will she keep the protections that are already in place? So I think these are issues that they could be hammering on. But even in 2016, even 2020, Pete Buttigieg, Gina Raimondo was governor of Rhode Island, but Pete Buttigieg ran for president. And then as soon as Biden won, he said, okay, I'm with you. I'm going to get out there and campaign for you. And Cory Booker did the same thing and still does it. So I think there are some Democrats that are really party loyalists. But I think there are some Democrats that may think, well, if McKee loses, then if I want to run again for governor, as Alan Fung did, he ran twice, then I have Kalus. And maybe that's good for me. So I don't know what's in their minds, but it is endemic now that we have some difficulty in terms of seeing unification in the Democratic Party, where we have no difficulty in seeing unification in the Republican Party.
Right. And much different than that Super Tuesday consolidation in the presidential race, where basically everyone other than Bernie Sanders rallied around President Biden. You don't know what happened behind the scenes to make that happen. There is no third party candidate or progressive Democrat running as an independent or anything like that is going to pull votes from the left away from McKee, at least, other than someone just saying, none of these people represent me, I'm not going to vote at all.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing there is a third party in the CD2, there's a third party candidate in the CD2 race.
Sure,
right?
yes, definitely there. Bill Gilbert, no question. That's
Gilbert could
put in the governor's race.
Yeah, in the governor's race, right. But the problem that I've been saying for a while to some folks is that there is no competitive Providence mayor's race.
Yes.
And on the east side of Providence, are sort of a vote-rich territory for Democrats typically. There, in many cases, the House member, the Senate member, the city council member, there's no races there either. Literally nobody on the ballot. In CD1, there is a Republican opponent to David Cicilline. But in a vote-rich environment, even Central Falls and Pawtucket, it depends whether they think the treasurer's race is competitive for James Diasa, but that's a huge amount of Democratic voting that may not happen in 2022. And if it doesn't happen, Kalus could win this governorship. Because if you think about the outer ring areas outside of Providence, some are very heavily Democratic, but some are heavily Republican. And if everybody plus the independents decides they want to change, it could cost McKee the race And it would be because there wasn't a lot of turnout in the Providence area. So I have to look at early voting in these areas to really sort of see how that's progressing in these areas. But you've got to figure turnout will be low. And if it is, that's an opening for both the Alan Fung and the CD2 and also Ashley Kalus. And again, Alan Fung's campaign, if people are enthusiastic on the Republican side, then they're going to get out the door. That helps Ashley Kalus. They're going to vote for her at the same time.
Yeah, very interesting and definitely something to watch for, obviously in early voting, but also on election night, looking at those returns and or even throughout the course of the day. Does the lack of a Providence mayor's race impact the Democratic ticket as a whole? It's going to be fascinating to watch. CD2, of course, this has become a national race. The New York Times profiled it recently, Washington Post, Fox News, you name it. This is a national race. There's no question about it. Alan Fung, he's a brand, he's a household name, and he has really tried to position himself as Mr. Rhode Island. He's got the clam chowder and he's at Twin Oaks. He's high-fiving police officers in his commercials, the superhero in khakis. Does this tactic work? Is it going to bring in people who are going to say, hey, wait a minute, as an independent voter, I don't know if Seth Magaziner represents the every man, for lack of a better term, Rhode Islander that Alan Fung does, for maybe even that low information voter. Does that help Fung get across the finish line?
Yeah, I mean, Fung is generally, I think, well respected, well liked. I think he didn't have statewide experience in 2014 when he ran against Gina Raimondo, and I think that hurt him a little bit. Plus, it tends to lean a Democratic state. And then in 2018, he really got hammered on the Trump affiliation, going to the inauguration, wearing a Trump hat. Yeah. And I think he lost by a bigger margin, actually, to Gina Raimondo in the 2018 than did 2012. So I think that hurt him, that national association. It has not seemed to hurt him this time around, which is interesting, but that's because the CD2 is constructed in a way that is more competitive for a Republican or more conservative leaning member than for the Democrats. And there's some redistricting going to happen in 2012 where the state legislature put a whole bunch of people in CD1 that might actually have voted Democratic in CD2 if they've been left there. So that kind of redistricting has played a little bit of a role in the margin here. And also Alan Fung has been running, he sort of stayed in the game. He visited meetings. He was out and about. You'd run into him. He'd say, I'm thinking of running something. We're not sure. So he's been still in everybody's face and everybody's minds. Seth Magaziner was treasurer and then was running for governor. Clearly running for governor, and then switch gears. And it's very hard to win a congressional seat if you don't campaign for 2 years. And he's really only started in the beginning of February.
That's right.
And I think that irritated some people. And plus, Alan Fung already asked for people's vote in CD2 in 2014 and 2018. They know him. He's already asked for the votes, not to mention Cranston being mayor. So in that sense, he had a built-in base. And the thing that's got to worry Democrats, about the seat and also across the country is that since June, Alan Fung's had a lead in the polls. The polls have a margin of error that are large, but it hasn't been that it's tightening. It's getting bigger, that lead. He's picking up support. And this is after getting a barrage of ads that associate him with Donald Trump, with Kevin McCarthy, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Matt Gaetz. So that's not working. And Magaziner's campaign has pivoted now. They have really pivoted towards the issues of Social Security and Medicare, which the Republicans will try to cut. That's what they want to do. So Alan Fung, has benefited from just a long set of years where he's known, held office, and campaigned, and people have seen him before. They've met him before. And so independents may say, I want to change, I want something different. I like the guy, I trust him. The real challenge for Alan Fung will be once he gets elected, if he gets elected, voting with the Republican Party as it stands now in the House, 85% of the time, means voting against the environment, against unions, against women's issues, against the president. That's a tough thing to sell to come back to in 2024. I think it's going to be a very, very challenging road for him as a member of Congress coming as in the Republican Party coming from Rhode Island.
Yeah, the door is wide open in 2024 if Alan Fung wins on the Democratic side. You mentioned him, and he hasn't gotten a ton of attention. He was in one of the televised debates. Bill Gilbert, who ran for governor as a moderate in 2018, he's in this congressional race in CD2. Some polling shows him at 5%. A recent, I think it was yesterday, a Democratic Congressional Committee poll suggests that within CD2, and it was a low number there was about 800 people polled, that Magaziner and Fung are at 48% each. They didn't propose Bill Gilbert in that poll, so he was left out of it. Do you think that could swing the race here? Do you think there's a chance that Bill Gilbert is the deciding factor in this whole thing?
Well, I think actually it would swing the race towards Magaziner. I know I'm in the minority on that opinion, but I do. I think if you are thinking, I like what I have, I like the incumbent, I like the Democratic Party, I want to see that sustained, then you're not voting for Bill Gilbert, right? It's the people who are unhappy with Biden or unhappy with Democrats who are going to vote for Bill Gilbert. And those are people who would vote for Alan Fung. So I can't see people voting who would vote for Magaziner because I don't like he may not be as well known and sort of well liked as Alan Fung per se, but he's not disliked, and he's not a dislikable candidate. He's not a dislikable character, at least in my opinion. Some people may say that he, the elitist tag has sort of stuck with him, that Fung has painted him with that, and that's been successful. But nonetheless, if you're unhappy with the status quo, you go to vote for somebody else. If you want the Democratic Party to sustain power, you're voting for Magaziner. So I don't know how the Gilbert vote doesn't take away from Alan Fung.
Very interesting stuff. Looking at the national stage, a debate in Pennsylvania, in the Pennsylvania Senate, John Fetterman versus Dr. Oz. This is a major race. It could swing the balance of power in the Senate. And Fetterman, coming off of, he had a stroke. Let's be honest, he had a stroke earlier this year. It's tough to discern how his performance was impacted by that stroke, but it wasn't. There were times in that debate that took place earlier this week that you said, boy, this guy looks like he's struggling, and you kind of felt for him a little bit. Do you think, looking from the outside, of course, do you think that race now is suddenly more competitive from the Republican standpoint? And if so, will that decide the balance of power in the Senate?
I have no idea who will win that race. I do think that the Fetterman, you have to wonder whether the Pennsylvania Democratic Party made the right choice by allowing him to keep the nomination after he had suffered the stroke. There's, two sides to this. Pennsylvania is like Rhode Island. They have a similar proportion of people over the age of 65. People over the age of 65 generally have had conditions, issues, illnesses that they've recovered from, or they know people in their family who have recovered from them. They want to believe that you can have a full life after you recover from an incident. So, and since they have an older population that votes a lot, I think if Fetterman combines the ads against Oz on Medicare and Social Security, Republican Party wanting to cut them, with, listen, you must have had he has an ad like this. I've had a health issue. I've recovered. You must have a health issue. I'm going to do the right thing. Even if I'm not 100%, I'm going to vote in your interest all the time, where he's never going to vote in your interest, and he's healthy. Who do you want? I mean, I think that's the campaign that they're going to have to run in the closing weeks here. And I think it's very competitive. We'll have to wait and see what happens. But I do think these are real concerns. People may say, I want an effective advocate. But if that advocate is going to vote against your interests, then, maybe you say, well, and if Pennsylvania has, if Fetterman has to step down for some reason, if they elect Josh Shapiro as governor, as a Democrat, he'll appoint somebody at least temporarily, and that seat will most likely still hold for the Democrats. So I think it depends. And I think for Fetterman, it's more important that he get African-American votes out in the Pittsburgh and the Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia area, where, that turnout has been, it helped Biden, but that turnout has to get out. And I don't know how they're doing there, and I don't know how he's doing there. Labor is still really important in Pennsylvania. And so I think labor is heavily working on behalf of Fetterman, but it's true. Now we have other senators. Lujan from New Mexico had a stroke, recovered. We also had Tim Johnson from South Dakota had a stroke and recovered. So, you have to see, even Joe Biden had difficulties 30 years ago, but it did remind me of the dynamic of a vibrant Trump against Biden, who stumbles, who looks a little older. And Trump is only 3 years younger than Biden, but has like a lot of vitality to him. And people really are attracted to that. And yet Trump lost Pennsylvania. So when you think about that, that same electorate is getting out the door in 2022. And even though Biden's approval ratings are lower, you have to wonder if there's just a more complex way in which Pennsylvania voters assess candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you alluded to, all eyes on Allegheny County and getting out the quote unquote minority vote. That's really where this thing is likely to be decided. No question.
Yeah. And other groups too, like Jewish voters too. Jewish voters may not constitute as nearly as large a population, but certainly in the Pittsburgh area, after the synagogue shooting, the white supremacist synagogue shooting against that killed 11 people. And then you also have Mastroianno, who's got ties to white supremacy, anti-Semitic organizations, running for governor. And you have a Jewish person running for governor of Pennsylvania. So I think that may be a vote people undercount and so I think that might, if it's really close, getting bigger turnouts in that area for Fetterman and for Shapiro, I think could swing things.
Very interesting stuff. Last couple of minutes here. So just coming back home to Rhode Island, Lieutenant Governor, some of the down ballot races. Lieutenant Governor, we had a debate yesterday on WPRO that I moderated. And, you've got Sabina Matos, who is in the incumbents, has the incumbency. Aaron Gukayan, though, the debate was interesting yesterday. They both, it got aggressive at times, and some would even say mean-spirited. I've heard that description. But do you see that as a competitive race, as well as treasurer? That's the other one that I think there's a lot of buzz about, the possibility of James Lathrop upsetting James Diossa. Do you see either of those swinging to the right?
Bill, I think this is a fantastic question, and it's quote unquote overlooked races because we have other attention elsewhere, but really important factors at play here. Let's start with the lieutenant governor's race. Sabina Matos is a retail politician. She wouldn't debate for a while again, then she did. Now she is debating, which I think was a wise move on her part to start debating again. But she has been meeting with small groups. She accepts every invitation. She's been side by side with McKee. She has really, I think, cemented, in my opinion, support, particularly among business owners and small business owners and some parts of the Latinx community. She's Dominican. Dominicans are the largest Latinx subgroup in Rhode Island. So I feel like I just drove the other day to Cranston, and I saw big signs for Sabina Matos along with other signs for other politicians. She has worked hard to get that, 10 vote, 20 vote, 50 vote, 100 vote kind of margin in small places. So I see, even though there's some issues there, I see her emerging victorious in that race. I think she's well known. She's got face recognition, name recognition. So I think the treasurer's race is a toss-up to me. Diossa has also good reservoir of political capital. People like Diossa. They like his story. They like him. But it's been always kind of unclear what his qualifications are to be treasurer. And I think Lathrop's making the argument, you can like the guy, it doesn't mean he should oversee billions of dollars of state investment. Right. So I think and once again, geography, will there be the turnout in Central Falls, in Pawtucket, in other areas of the state? And Diossa is Colombian, so there's that sort of nation of origin Latinx kind of affiliation is not quite as strong and compelling as Dominican in the state of Rhode Island. So I'm wondering who gets out the door for Diossa, and does he win? If Alan Fung gets a lot of Republicans out again in CD2, do all those people just vote straight line Republican? So I think women may be more inclined, I do think, to vote for Sabina Matos, because I think they like the idea of having a woman in senior offices. Because think about this, Secretary of State, Amore looks like he's going to win that race. We're not sure, but it looks like that. So then you're going to have all men back in office. So I think a lot of women will say, no, we want at least a woman in office and lieutenant governor. But I think other people, particularly in the ring suburbs, may say we don't think Diossa has the kind of experience, and we're voting Republican anyway. And that's, again, getting back to Ashley Kalus. Women may say, you know what? I'd like to have a woman. And then a lot of men who maybe were sick of Gina Raimondo, not to be stereotypical, but may say, I want a man. And that's why these things are really intertwined. And last point I would say about debates: the one thing about a male and a female debate, don't mansplain the woman. McKee did that to Ashley Kalus several times in the debate, one of the debates I saw. And I think women who even are thinking of voting for McKee didn't like it. And I think Kalus and Sabina Matos want to position themselves. She keeps saying, stop telling me I don't understand things. And I think that's something that might resonate in a way with women that is quite powerful. I'm not sure it'll make any Democrats vote for Republican, but independent women may decide to make those choices.
With the increasing legalization of cannabis across the country, including most recently Rhode Island, the cannabis industry is growing at a rapidly accelerating pace. If you are already in the industry or wondering what is the best path to break into the cannabis field, well, the University of Rhode Island has a program to help educate you in the evolving space. Fully accredited by URI's College of Pharmacy, the online certificate program covers topics related to product development, chemical analysis and testing, and patient and customer therapeutics. The next application deadline for the spring 2023 session is November 29th, and courses start January 10th. Join them at 2 upcoming info sessions and learn more at uri.edu/online/cannabis, or give them a call at 401-874-5280.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.